I am so thrilled to have a guest return to the podcast who joined me in a previous season. And let me tell you a little bit about them. Anjali Rao. Anjali brings an intersectional and decolonial feminist lens to the study of philosophy and religion of Indic traditions, integrating storytelling, art, and poetry. Anjali is deeply influenced by her own dance training, and her work emphasizes an embodied approach and explores how spirituality, power, and politics intersect. Anjali's first book, Yoga as Embodied Resistance, A Feminine Lens in Caste, Gender, and Sacred Resilience in Yoga History, by North Atlantic Books, was named as one of the 10 most inspiring, insightful, and seriously worthwhile books of 2025 by Yoga Journal. And in quotes, a scholarly work and a deeply personal journey by L.A Book Review. Anjali is on the faculty of multiple yoga education programs and considers herself a first and foremost forever student and is currently pursuing a PhD in philosophy and religion, specifically women's spirituality, at the California Institute of Integral Studies. I get to call Anjali a dear friend, really speaking a sister, and we share so much that I'm sure we're going to get into. And needless to say, there will not be enough time to just go as deep as I would like to with this amazing human. But without further ado, please join me in welcoming Anjali Rao to Heartistry. And we welcome Anjali Rao to Heartistry.
Hello, so awesome to be here again with you, Farah. It's been like how many years on
Funny
this
enough,
platform?
I already recorded your intro before we started, and I had, wanted to search for the bio, and it pulled up your previous one, which I also kind of want to talk about in a moment, but that was 2020. It was March 2020. So, oh my God, it was March 25th, 2020, and today is the 23rd. So almost
Ooh,
quite literally 6 years.
6 years.
Yeah.
Amazing.
There you go. And I will say, Anjali, I mean, again, folks just heard a little bit about you, but that was the document, the previous one came up and I read it and I'm like, yes, and like there's, like from where to where you've come. And so we are certainly going to get into all of that. Um, you know, and I already said in my intro, there is certainly not going to be enough time because I know how you and I roll, and it's going to be we want to talk about everything to the
Yes.
T, and that's the beauty
Yes.
of our friendship, our sisterhood. Uh,
Yes.
but I just know this conversation is just going to scratch the surface of all the amazingness that encompasses you. So,
Thank you. I feel very much the same.
well, so what I do love to do is, as you may recall from the last time we spoke, I love to hear a little bit about your origin story. We do have time to get to the present eventually, but tell us a little bit about, anything about your personal history, your family history, where you were born, brought up. Yeah, well, again, we will make our way towards the present.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful question. I was born in India, in Mumbai actually, but I grew up in Bangalore, India, and lived there for the first 23 years of my life. Moved here when I got married and to Portland, Oregon, and went there to grad school. Um, Long story short, I moved here to California. And then I got diagnosed with breast cancer, which at a pretty young age, at 37. And that kind of literally changed my life. I was a young mother of two children and completely a healthy human being, as far as I knew. And so this was just something that randomly my doctor asked me to do. And, because I had some family history of some cancer, so she just was trying to be very, very, what do you say?
Like diligent.
Yeah, diligent about my health. So she said, why don't you just get it done? And I had kept pushing it off. And then I don't know, something made me go. And then I
Mm,
had what was called as a ductal carcinoma in situ, which means that the cancer was in the ducts,
mhm.
which hadn't yet spread. And because I was 37 that time, I took the decision to go through a bilateral mastectomy and then reconstruction. And I was looking for, as I was recovering, I was looking for something to get back to like a connection with my physical body because I knew that I needed to build strength, and I was always a very physically active person, and I really missed that. I'm a dance student. I've learned from you. So I really wanted to get that. And I went to my first yoga class and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I want to do this. I want to teach. Something came to me and I wanted to teach this to folks going through cancer. It was very specific. And until then, I really had not really liked yoga. I thought yoga was very boring. What is this holding poses? I was a dancer. I liked movement.
Yeah.
So I went to my teacher, and my teacher was very gracious, and she said, "Why don't you come for your second yoga class, and then let's go from there." So I went every single day. Somehow made time for myself with young children,
Yeah.
and because I knew that something was shifting, not only in my physical self, but
Mm,
honestly in my mental and emotional self. And I wanted to know what that was and how that would kind of lead me. And finished my 200 hours of yoga teacher training, which is like sort of the baseline for
mm,
folks here in the US, and then the 300 hours. And then in my 200 hours itself, I got to hear, a person who later became a mentor and
mm.
a really good friend of mine, Lorian, who used to teach at Stanford for in a cancer program. So I did an apprenticeship with her and I started teaching in Stanford. So that was like generally my direction of my life's work where I thought it would be going.
Right.
I was teaching in hospitals and health centers and stuff like that. And while I was doing that, I also realized that healthcare was access to healthcare was going to
Mm,
be is an important thing that I was seeing, and that was something that I would say, everybody has things that awaken them in their
yeah.
political consciousness, and for me, it was that accessibility to healthcare. And I realized that
Mm,
I was blessed enough to get access to healthcare, but I know that not many people do. Some of the patients were working through chemo because they had to for the insurance.
yeah.
And I got more politically more aware.
Mm,
And and at the same time, around that same time, George Floyd and the summer of racial awakening happened, so-called racial awakening, because look where we are.
right.
Um, and I realized that what I was doing on a yoga mat and what was happening outside, there has to be some bridge.
Mm,
There has to be something that I integrate these different aspects of my interest. And I started reading, and one of the books that I read was a book called Skill in Action by one of my friends now, Michelle Cassandra Johnson. And she talked about how what is happening outside is a macrocosm of what happens in a yoga classroom, like who gets
mm,
access to a yoga class. And that kind of like really put words to things that I've always really felt, and I wanted to start to integrate um, social justice, social change into what I was doing in terms of teaching yoga and then later on yoga philosophy and history and so on. And while I was doing all of that, had my own podcast, which I invited folks from like the front lines of many liberatory movements, Black folks, trans folks, and really wanted to bridge the world of yoga to
mhm.
activism, like actual people who are actively challenging various systems of oppression. And while I was doing that, I got in conversations with caste abolitionists, and I had already started reading about caste and what that really means.
Mm,
And since I come from a positionality of caste privilege, to me, I was always told in my education system back in India that caste has been abolished and it
yeah.
is, it is illegal. And I grew up in Bangalore, and because of my own privilege, caste was invisible to me. But I realized that caste is very much internalized and sort of the invisible air around you. And I wanted to see how I or one should look at caste and in terms of the system of yoga.
Mm.
And I started shifting things around from how I teach. And one Instagram post around that time claimed that it was the West that liberated the women to practice yoga. And I always half joke about it. The
No.
way I take revenge is I turn to my bookshelf and I nerd out and get more informed. And I said, who are the people who I'm reading? Who am I quoting? Who am I studying and teaching
Mm.
from? Right? And most of them were men.
Ah,
Most of them were
got it.
Euro-American men, and then later on, the Brahmin men,
Yeah.
caste privileged men, and then the Euro-American scholar. So I said, where are the women scholars? And so I knew that I had to kind of name those things because I personally hadn't studied anything or read anything which kind of brought those two
Mm.
together. And so my work was then about really
Mm.
crystallizing those aspects of yoga history. And to say that, hey, yes, supposedly yoga is liberatory, but there are threads of oppression, of caste and patriarchy that are not named.
Right.
Um, so I started teaching that. And while I was teaching that, some of my colleagues were like, you need to write about this.
Uh, yes.
And yeah,
Well, I know we're going to get more into that, and I
yeah,
certainly want to. I just kind of want to bounce back to some of the things you've been sharing thus far too. Is you know it's just so interesting. I think even just talking about when we have that deep curiosity for something, and we're moving towards it. We're sourcing information, knowledge, essentially, right? And it's just such a slippery slope of you can go there, but then you also have to be so critical
yeah,
of even what you are using as your source, as your resource.
absolutely.
And that can be in a class setting, and actually in academia. I mean, I think as we get older, if we choose to, we realize how subjective information is. And
Absolutely.
I mean, and obviously social media, fake news, whatever you want to, however we want to name it. But just think about the years of conditioning in which we didn't have the tools to name it.
Absolutely.
It's really
Absolutely.
profound.
Absolutely. And things like history, for example, right, Farah? I mean, what is history, right? History is what has been told to us as collection of facts and dates, but who has chosen those events as
Right.
being important, right? So we have to look at what we call as historiography, which is how are those events interpreted, who gets to interpret them, who gets to pick them. So studying about history. So those are the things that I really bring about in the work
Yes.
that I am doing right now, even in my current ongoing research as well as in the book. So I wrote the book, which is called Yoga as Embodied Resistance, and it offers a feminist lens on caste, gender, and resilience in yoga history as a way of really integrating some scholarship that I was studying with practitioners
Uh,
who don't have access to some of these research.
yeah.
So that's where I kind of landed my origin story, as you asked.
Beautiful. Let's go ahead and take our first pause here.
Okay.
Welcome back to Heartistry. This is Farah Yasmin Sheikh, and today we are speaking with Anjali Rao and hearing a little bit about your history. There's certainly a big part of that I know we're going to get into a little bit more, which is you mentioned dance, and I know that continues to play a major part in it has shaped you quite literally. And we we'll certainly get into that because especially when we talk about the book, I know dance and storytelling as a medium that you have explored mainly through dance will come up. But I want to even just talk a little bit about you mentioned, some of these individuals that you were learning from. And as you were reflecting and digging deeper again, they were like, you have to write about this. And, you mentioned the title of the book. But was it enough for somebody and or multiple people to say, hey, do this? And you said, you know what, I'm going to. Like, what's been sort of the trajectory of even those seeds being planted for you to actually say, I'm ready to take this on from a practical time management perspective and all the things? Yeah.
Ah, I love this question, Farah. Thank you for asking that. Um, no, it was absolutely a no when someone told me to write. I was like, really? I'm not, first of all, ready. I don't think I never thought of myself as a writer. I mean, I've
Mm,
written like articles, I've written things on and off through the years, but I never really thought of myself as a writer of a book, especially
mm,
something as important and complicated as the subject that I ended up writing, which is
yeah.
history and very complicated history of gender and patriarchy and caste and stuff like
Yes.
that. Um, so I didn't think that it was possible, plausible, all of that, all of those things. It took some convincing and it took some reflection, a lot of reflection, and it took some convincing from myself, not from others, but
Mm,
from myself that I should do it. Is this the time for me to do it? What are my life circumstances? Is it ever going to allow me to do it? I'm a caregiver, I'm a parent, I'm a daughter of two older parents who are sick and all that.
live abroad. Yeah.
They're abroad, they're in India. So I had all those concerns whether I should. And then I really thought to myself, if I don't do this in a certain way, then uh, what will be lost,
Yeah.
you know and it was Toni Morrison who said that if you have not read a book that is something that you wanted to read, then you should be the one to write it.
Mm,
And I really literally took those words to heart because I was like, I hope that this book challenges all the powers and opens up more doors for folks, really builds bridges between caste oppressed people and caste privileged people, and challenges, notions of nationalism, patriarchy, casteism, racism, all of the isms in whatever ways they
mm,
can in the communities that I have agency in,
mm.
and that can build ripples out, hopefully. And given the political moment that we are in right now in the world, not only
Yeah.
here, in the world, how important is that these kind of stories of resistance and resilience are put out, into the world. And I feel like all of us have a role to play in those movements. And I knew that I had the skill to at least do that much,
Mm,
or at least I could push myself to do that much. So and I also want to share that, the other day I heard some author who said that she had the luxury of going into a retreat and writing, completely shutting doors to the world outside and writing for a month. I did not have that luxury. I very much was a mom to a teenager and a person who's going to go to college at that time.
mm,
I've written it in hospitals. I've written it in, thought about things when I was doing the school drive,
yeah.
while cooking dal, like, taking the dog for a walk, or all the mundane routine stuff that we are doing while we are living. And I think especially for women, we put off like our dream project for an number of years because we're like, when everything gets better and settled, then I will do that. But often that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
There is no a point over the rainbow when you can do that, right?
Mm,
So I felt like that to me is feminism.
yeah.
While being in the mud of life, if we are talking about feminist resistance
Mm,
and stories of our ancestors, like that to me, was feminism.
100%. Yeah. And I also want to name again, that is feminism, and that's both the power and the really intense challenge,
Mhm.
and often a challenge that we have to meet with no choice.
We have no choice, and we
Yeah.
have to make those,
Yeah.
or we have to make certain choices, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There are certain things that I can't do anymore. Like I don't socialize enough. I have no life socially,
Yeah.
or I choose my social life to like a certain thing or say no to certain things
Yeah.
because I feel like that will take away from my energy. And so I try to be more mindful about where I want my energy to flow. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't,
Right.
but at least you try.
Yeah.
And
There's a state of consciousness that comes just from even being a little more discerning about it.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I just wanted to name that, especially for
Yeah.
folks who are women of color. And I think it's harder because, and South Asians especially, because there are so many societal expectations of
Yeah.
us. Oh, the daughter-in-law, oh, the sister-in-law, oh, the daughter, oh,
Yeah.
so those kind of things. So I that it has been a revelation for me as well, like how
Mhm.
much do I want to do this, and it has made me more compassionate toward myself and toward somebody else trying to accomplish their dream, and understanding that I also have so much in terms of access to things.
Yeah.
So I have to acknowledge that and honestly pave the way forward for other folks.
Yeah. Well, and that is something that you do quite consistently throughout the book. You're naming your positionality, your privilege throughout, that as much as you are analyzing, sometimes often I will say critiquing aspects of, whether it is previous writings and or information, and quite literally historical revered texts that have come out. You're doing that from the lens of, look, I am calling this out, but also naming my privilege, and even being able to do that.
Yes.
And I also want to name, Anjali, like, all the things that we were talking about. Like, you didn't just go isolate yourself and write this book, and this book is one that is backed with, this is not to diminish that this would also be anybody who writes, say, an autobiography or a memoir or anything like that. It's not to say that that is not a huge project and endeavor in and of itself. But again, you were going into topics and subtopics that did require, because you chose to make it a priority, required research
Mhm.
and evidence-based research, as well as debunking of what was previously evidence-based research.
Yes.
And again, the integrity in which that happens, and that integrity comes with thoroughness and time. And
Yes.
so, what you have accomplished is not to go unrecognized.
Thank you. Thank
Really. Yeah, I say that from like just a complete position of just complete inspiration. And I'm just astounded that you were able to go that deep with all of the factors being what they are and were. But let's get into the book a little bit. And again, the title, I love when you say the title, because it rolls off your tongue much faster than it will me.
Yeah.
If you don't mind saying the
Yeah,
title. Okay.
absolutely. Yes. Yoga as Embodied Resistance, and it offers a feminist lens on caste, gender, and sacred resilience in yoga history.
And those last three, caste, gender, and
Sacred resilience.
sacred resilience. But just even take caste and gender. And again, it kind of speaks to my point before. Those are such huge topics in and of themselves in relation to the subject matter you were appropriating those factors to.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yes, there's always, you know, intersectional points and connection and all of that, no doubt. But I remember also feeling that. But just talk through some of the things that maybe I guess I'm curious to know, when you started putting pen to paper, were you like, I know I want to say this, but now I need to back this up. I would love to know how much of that was happening and or examples of maybe you thought you were going in one direction, but because you came upon some information that actually took you in a direction you didn't expect.
Mm. No, I think those are great questions. I've started, when people ask me some of my processes, I wonder what actually my processes were.
Hmm.
Because my processes have been from but now, okay, so basically now I'm doing my PhD, right? And so now there are
And you were
frameworks.
doing it while you wrote the book. Let's just also name that.
That's right. That's right. It all sort of happened,
Yeah.
overlapped in very, uh, what is that word?
Serendipitous? Yes.
Serendipitous ways. Yes, exactly. So, now I know is what I was doing comes from a sort of a decolonial, uh, uh, intuitive, what we call as intuitive inquiries,
Hmm.
which means that you're sort of leading with your intuition
Hmm.
also, and that's actually a methodology which I did not know, you know. So I did have certain things that I wanted to hit in the book because I realized that those are the things that are not really talked about in text that I was reading from a yoga world, in the
Yeah.
yoga world. Though all those things were mentioned in other ways, like for example, in Tenmuri Soundararajan, the person who wrote my forward, who is the ultimate sort of an honor for me as a Dalit feminist to write a forward for my work as a Savarna. And so there were books that I was reading which were naming some of these things based
Hmm.
on their caste positionality, and I really wanted to bring those in context of the world of yoga, so there were certain things that I did want to talk about because there are, for example, this whole thing about cultural appropriation being, yes, do this, do that, like sort of very reductive list making that happens. And I wanted to complicate that because it is a complicated question, and I wanted to complicate what patriarchy and feminism means because feminism is not a Western concept. Every region, every religion, every system has had anti-patriarchal movements, and I wanted to name that. And I wanted to use storytelling because I'm not a trained historian.
Hmm.
I'm a dancer and I'm in many ways a storyteller. So I wanted to use what I have or I've been trained to, and are our ancestral sort of traditions, right? So I talk about kathas in the as a method of really talking about some of these very complicated issues, and I never had like index cards. I'm not a very methodical, quote unquote, organized way of research. It is all in my head, and I
Huh.
do have like sometimes I make some notes on my cell phone. Nobody should, touch my cell phone because that has everything. And um, but there were three stories which I knew I was going to write. Right, the first three stories I knew I was going to write because I've sat with them, I've lived with those stories. They're such a big part of
Hmm.
who I am in so many ways. So those three stories came very easily for me, and the last story, Piro's story, came harder, and it I added it later because I
Ah.
was like, as I was writing it, I was like, I needed to end on something, from a different religious tradition than my positionality. And Piro is Muslim. She's a Muslim courtesan, and then later sort of integrates her faith with Sikh and Sufism and all of those things. So, and I wanted to also chronologically end at a time which just came before the colonization came in. So that I've kind of like morphed around,
Hmm.
and in terms of my writing and my research, and I haven't really changed in terms of like, this I was doing something and then something came up and then I changed it
Hmm.
completely.
Yeah.
Though I have added and integrated as I studied more.
Mm.
right? So I was writing all of this stuff, and then I was doing these coursework in my PhD coursework, and I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense to what I've written already. So I would go back and I would write that, and then make sure it flows with the rest of the stuff. So that kind of additions and
Mm.
integrations I've done as I integrated, and that's what I even share even with my students and my yoga community, is to really take time and pause and to integrate stuff as you learn, not to just just because you have to do something to do it in a hurry, but really to take time and integrate, because in a capitalistic world we are told to be productive,
Mm.
and we have to always produce and that churn out things. But I'm like, take your time and really integrate, because these are really big things,
Yeah.
and only then it becomes a part of you, and only that's from that space of honesty you can share.
Mm. I
you
love
know
that. I love that. Let's go ahead. We'll take a second pause here. Welcome back to Heart History. We are speaking today with Anjali Rao and starting to get a little bit more into really the content and of this very rich book that you wrote. And you've mentioned a few times, the storytelling aspect and how essentially you took stories of different women in history and the surrounding individuals in their lives, and how it was just such a fascinating way for somebody who is going into a book like that to basically almost even reposition how we look at, again, how did we get here? How do we get here? Who has been fighting the fight long before we were? Just all of these different ways. I know, even though I had had conversations with you, so I was more privy, and one could say I had more awareness and or a different set of expectations, but it still took me back because just the depth in which you approach this. So, can you talk a little bit about some of these stories that you shared and, who they surrounded?
Yes. So the how I've laid out my book is, the first part almost is laying the foundations of what we are looking at in terms of yoga, quote unquote yoga history, and the origins of yoga and origins of Hinduism, and how those are integrated. And then the next four chapters are about stories, and I wanted to kind of go through a chronology of yoga history, but use stories and then talk about the development of yoga in certain ways, and deconstruct the systems of caste, deconstruct how gender plays a role. The first story is of a person called Sulaba, who is a mythical person who really gets into a debate with a king and sort of defeats him. And it's a very intellectual, philosophical debate about the notions of gender and patriarchy.
Mm.
And I came across her story in another research article by a scholar, and I want to name her Ruth Vanita. And I loved it. I was like, why isn't this known? I know this now at that time I was in my 40s. Why isn't this known to every person? Because imagine now, when there are regulations going on about against trans folks in India and the US, if people knew that the notion of gender was challenged 3,000 years ago,
Mm.
what would have changed, and how internalized would those notions be in
Mm.
society now,
Yeah.
right? So those frameworks of what gender is has been constructed because of patriarchy that sets in, but those constructions have been challenged throughout. So it's not like a absolute truth,
Yeah.
you know so I wanted to kind of bring that very first
Mm.
aspect. and chronologically it made sense too, in terms of the history. And then the second one is, of course, one of my favorites, which is Radha. Radha is a mythical muse, or and she's a mythical person as well as a muse of poets for centuries. And many people who have read the book say that that has been their favorite part, and that is the thing that feels like my writing has been most compelling.
Huh,
And I've sat with that because even when I was writing it, I loved it. So I was thinking, why is it that this feels alive for most folks, and why was it so much fun for me to write?
huh.
And I think it was A, because Radha has been with me for the longest
Yeah.
as a dancer, and I've felt it in my body, you know.
I also, well, I can't help but wonder to be, I don't know if devil's advocate is the right appropriation here, but I also think that in some ways, Radha is the most known, right? So people felt, just as like you said, she's been with
Correct.
you the longest. So there was almost an accessibility where
Yes.
the others, it's sort of like, oh, oh,
Yeah.
oh, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. No,
so,
that's true. That also could be right. And maybe that sort of a familiarity makes them feel more connected
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
But there was a the way in which you brought Radha was also like it almost brought another dimension
Yes.
of who we think we know.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what I wanted to do. And I wanted to kind of subvert her story because
Mm.
most of the stories are about how she longed for Krishna, and that is true. But I also wanted to subvert it, and I don't want to spoil it for the people here, but I subverted her story in so many ways. And I
Yeah.
did that intentionally because at the end of the day, the stories are a window into the world that existed and exists. So
Mhm.
right now, my this is the world that we are in, and I can subvert it because subversion and narrations have always been based on the needs of the society.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah.
So I did that intentionally, and I had so much fun doing it. So I know that that's going to be a big part, not Radha personally, but um, that is going to be a big part of my dissertation and work moving
Mm.
forward because I really enjoy doing it.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, and the third one is Mahadevi Akka, who's from my ancestral lands, Karnataka. So, she again was this woman who refused to comply and conform to gender norms and patriarchal norms of her times, and rejected her marriage and walked out with, shedding literally her clothes, and walked out with uttering these spontaneous utterances called vachanas, and decrying norms of caste and class and patriarchy, and just with unwavering love and devotion to who she considered her husband, her spiritual husband, who is Shiva. So, Mahadevi Akka's I always knew that she's going to be a part of my storytelling because of my ancestral connection. And I always thought her story was really compelling because it's basically reclamation of autonomy and
Mm.
so many ways.
I
Uh,
have to say, Anjali, I've been thinking, it's so interesting. As much as I agree with everything you're saying and felt that, and we'll talk about how I became more familiar with these stories, of course, but through you, but through our very particular shared experience. But I was also like, huh. And I remember having this conversation a little bit with you about Biru's story, who you referenced earlier in our conversation. Um, it's still this part of me that it still comes down to like masculine power on some level, because like you said, I mean, it's devotion, it's spiritual devotion to Shiva. And as much as I want to respect that and still say there's agency, there's self-determination, there's all of that, and I don't want to diminish that, I'm still like, but the end game was,
yes.
and it's so interesting how when one door opens, what's the next door you have to kick down?
You're right. You're right. So in that sense of, like you said, like how Mahadevi was about her bhakti, her devotion, her love for Shiva, which is in the sense still sort of going into a relationship with what in whatever way with a man. Um, and that has been the critique of many scholars about patriarchy and bhakti as well, you know.
Huh.
That, so you're absolutely right in naming that. Um, Also, that was the pathway to for folks available that during those days
Context, yeah.
in that context for even intellectually uh, sharing their voice,
Yeah.
right? Because it is poetry, it is literature, and that was the literature given the medium that they were in, soaked in whatever context that they were in,
Yeah.
right? So that was their avenue for for intellectual uh, production, knowledge production,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, so I mentioned, the ways in which I came to know about, of course, Radha, I've had exposure to over the years of my being in relationship with Kathak. Uh, and yet, again, through you, sort of this I wouldn't say alternative lens, but like just kind of rethinking some of the things we think we know, ironically, some of which I had already explored even in my own storytelling. Um, and then, basically to give context to our listeners, your daughter Ayana is a beloved student of mine, of our organization, Nurani Dance. And she in what year are we in? So 2025, she did her first Kathak solo. And one of the things that, the students always do to really display kind of their comfort and confidence with all the different aspects of Gatak, and of course storytelling being a part of that, is to decide what story are they going to tell, playing all the characters and so on. And this happened to be as you were putting the finishing edits and touches on the book. It had not hit the stand, so to speak, just yet, but we had the inside track to the stories. And
Yes.
so, you and I talked to Ayana and said, is this something you want to maybe source any of this? And it was such an easy yes for her. And she chose to explore in two different segments of her performance. One segment being Radha, in which she had some of her peers of her same level and approximate age group join her. And we chose to do a piece that was really, and ironically, this is the story, the Gadbhav, that I did for my solo, which was all about Krishna Vasaharan, that idea of, him taking her clothes, and that of her friends as they're bathing and so on, but how they kind of flipped the script on him in our rendition of it, because we wanted to push the story a little further. Like, hey, you think this is all fun and games? You strip down and go in and see how that feels to have the gaze on you. And so it was such a fun exploration. It was, of course, comically, beautifully empowering, like just watching these young, these teenagers take on that bow. And it was just, but it was such a cool thing to explore and say, what if, how, yes, Radha stepping into her power can look very different, but also what does it look to put the character of, more often than not, dominance in the more inferior position. And we showed that sort of fragility of Krishna. And
Yes.
that was just as powerful as the power of Radha,
Yes.
and so that was so fun to explore. And of course, Deepthi Warrior, who is like a sister to you and I, brought her beautiful vocals into that, brought a known Tomri into to sharing that story and so on. And then the more fleshed out story that Ayana did on her own was that of Akka Mahadevi.
Yes.
And for she and I to have to go deeper in that, translate it into the dance, for somebody of, her level, who had never done storytelling, of telling both, or all the characters, not even just two, but multiple masculine and feminine roles, and even the evolution of a character, in this case, especially Mahadevi. I mean, it was awesome to see Ayana really take that on, and needless to say, to do it quite literally to your words, which I got to narrate, in addition to, again, Deepthi composing, taking those very vachana that you mentioned, and appropriating them, to different scenes to tell this story. I mean, it was a true collaboration steeped in your initial research, your, thought and intention behind it, us hoping that through the dance and music, we were building on that. And then Ayana, your own daughter, having to execute it. Like it was all the things. But yeah,
It was,
yeah.
yeah, no, it was one of the most moving, beautiful moments of my life. And I am so grateful to you, Farah, for that, and for teaching and just shaping Ayana to be the storyteller and to not only in terms of the techniques of Kathak, which is also really important, but also to really own her voice, which is
Mm.
very, you know, uh, right now so needed in the world that the younger folks, younger women, especially the youth, they need to really be coming into their own. So as an elder now, I feel like that sort of responsibility to get in the next generation, and those moments were some of the best. And even now I have people like telling me, I shared like snippets of that because my parents could not join us here because of their sick, they were not they did not have the capacity of coming here. I shared snippets of the show with them and Mahadevi with my uncles and aunties, and everybody were so touched and so moved, and we were all tearing up. So it was just an emotionally powerful moment. Like you said, it was also our own ancestral voices that we are now embodying, and that in itself feels such an honor, and to have the synergies, like you said, of you, me, and Ayana and Deepthi and the audience who were
Yeah.
like so receptive. So it was just a really special moment, but not only of that day, but even the process of us going to that, which was the path to go to that, because it is like, and you always tell all your students, I've been witness to what you always share, that it's really not that evening, but how you get prepared for it. And that is the thing that really changes you and shapes you. Your riyaz is the thing, right? Your practice is the thing. That's what I tell my students too in my yoga world too, right? That don't think about the ultimate shape, but what you're doing to get there. And that is the thing that will shape your being, you
Yeah.
know. So for me, it was really the whole process of not only honing her craft as a storyteller, but also honing her, shaping her voice and saying, no, this is what I want to do. And then you bringing your own expertise. It was just a wonderful experience. And I hope more people get to do that, with you, because that really will be a sort of a important shaper of who Ayana is.
Well, and again, it truly has a reciprocal impact on me, and I do love when we can find, especially in those storytelling segments, um, topics, subjects, stories that feel very personal for whatever reason to
Hmm.
the dancer, because then they're just that much more inclined to want to understand those characters, dig a little deeper. They feel a different sense of ownership and responsibility, which
Absolutely.
I love seeing that.
Absolutely.
Well, Anjali, I mean, just even thinking about all the things that we've touched on in this short amount of time, we talked about again, growing up in India, just sort of the influences, obviously, this highly unexpected reality of breast cancer, how that took you in the direction of yoga, where that has led you. And I want to just even not only, in all the things that we've touched on as far as getting to the present, but even go back to this concept of yoga and how, yes, it helped you physically. It obviously um, channeled something much greater in you and around, access to healthcare and marginalized groups and, all of these components that, again, totally unexpected outcomes, to say the
Hmm.
least. And before we started recording today, I told you, I said, I noticed you changed your Instagram handle, which up until last week, maybe the week before, it was Yoga Anjali or Yoga Anjali, right? You kind of doubled up on the A or like,
Yeah.
and now you are using your full name, Anjali Rao. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Yes, Anjali Rao. Yes.
And so I couldn't help but ask you, and I asked if we could bring this into the recorded conversation. So I'm going to ask again. Um, why the change? Because when I saw it, I felt that there was an intention behind it. Um, and you did confirm that, yes, there was. And so I do want to understand why, because, yeah, I won't say more than that. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you for naming that. I was wondering whether I should even share, not with you, but like on my own on my Instagram, like why I did that. And then I was like, that feels a little self-conscious to me to do that. Like, is it really important in the larger world? But I feel like yes, in many ways, I feel like I wanted to do that. It was time for me to uh, claim that my work is now expanding in many ways into what is not what most people think as only yoga, which is just asana, and that I'm just a yoga person, which is
Yeah.
what many people think as soon as they see the word yoga Anjali together.
Mhm.
What I'm trying to do is really question patriarchy in
Mm.
how it how it shapes religion, how it has been shaped by religion, right? And in my own religion, which is Hindu traditions. So bringing feminism and religion together is what my work is moving forward and has been, but it was always in the world of yoga. And now I want to kind of expand that in many ways because even people who say I'm not a yoga practitioner might want to listen to what I have to say,
Yeah.
because I'm really talking about patriarchy in a cultural way.
And, you know, this might be, for a lack of a better word, like a bit of a provocative thought or question, but is it also in some ways a little bit of a calling out of what yoga has become and not wanting to be solely associated with it?
Yes, I've been disillusioned in multiple ways by yoga. People say call it Yoga Landia, and my work has been stolen so many times by folks who profess to be social justice warriors and all the things. So I feel like I just was tired of it. I was tired of um, doing this as a Desi person who's already going through her own sort of erasure in the white yoga world. So here we are, South Asian, first of all, finding it hard to even be recognized
Mm.
as thought leaders or change makers or all of that. And then you have so what we call as sort of a lateral harm, you know, uh, within the community itself of South Asian folks when they do something, then what do we do? Like those are the things that not many people know how to navigate, you know. And if there is a power differential with like these people who are doing the stealing are doing it in some very manipulative, very covert way sometimes, then what do we do? How do we challenge
Mm.
that? Sometimes you can't, because it is not done in any way which can be legally called out. Because you take something and then you just massage it in a certain way and then it's no
Totally.
longer yours, but it's still the conceptualization of that thing is yours.
Yep.
So, and they're monetizing it. And so if it was a person who is my student taking something, learning from me and taking something from me, I'm okay with that. Even if they don't name me, I'm okay with that. Because
Mm.
I mean, that is on that person. Whoever my student is, if
Sure.
they've taken that, that is on
And
them.
you have at least had, even if, like you said, it's on that person, there is an element, well, you did engage in a direct relationship of teacher
Exactly.
student. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you sometimes see, for example, people who have hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram take something from you and change stuff around a little bit. Just take
Yeah.
some words, take it around, and then post it on their own, sell courses.
Yeah.
They make lots of money doing that. So I saw that a few times,
Mm,
and ironically enough, on International Women's Day or International whatever Women's History Month, which is going on now.
mm,
It was in Women's History Month, and my book is about women's history in the yoga
mm,
world, right? So I felt like I kind of got tired of it. I was thinking about how do I,
mm,
even before all this happened, how do I change, not change, but really name what I'm doing right now, because my work is now, my research is going in a certain way, and it has
mm.
nothing really overtly to do with the world of yoga, right? So
Yeah,
I have to kind of make that shift organically. I
sure.
was already thinking about it. And then when this happened, I don't know, something came over me. It was not anger, it was also being a sense of tiredness, and as
Hmm.
well at the same time, like, okay, I have to kind of shift this, and I have to kind of use this time for some self-reflection and say, let's do this now. And I don't know all the back end how it'll be in terms of, my website is not, I have to change that. So one of my friend who's really amazing reached out to me, said, okay, we need to change all of that
Yeah.
because my Instagram account is tied to certain things in
Right, right,
so
sure.
all that I didn't even really think about it. I did it just as a sort of a visceral response to something.
Yeah,
Uh, but it was also an intentional reclamation of my name and the work that I'm doing, which I think it's time for me to do it. So I've always been diffident about taking up space because I feel like I come from so much privilege sometimes that should I? But I also feel like this is my labor. This is my intent in, my, it's not only my labor, it is my ancestral voices that I we have to kind of bring into the world right now. So in so many in so many different ways, it is a responsibility. You-
yes. Yeah. And as we see, you don't even know always who you are inspiring, but it is important to recognize that we are all examples, even if it's to one person, even if it's to our own child, who knows? And so having again integrity, and that's really ultimately, I think, what you're doing, in addition to just following your own, like, what is calling you. And I think
Yeah,
that
yeah,
response is important.
absolutely. I mean, I want to like speak more in, for example, in on platforms talking about feminism and stuff, things like that.
Yeah,
And then what happens is when people see my Instagram, they think of me as a yoga person,
yeah,
and they don't really look at the research that has gone in my work, which is kind of really in depth. And I really wanted to at least share that in this way that my work is a little bit more than what you think it is.
yeah.
You know?
I hear
Yeah.
you. I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you bringing us into your thoughts around that, because again, like I said, when I saw that, it felt like there was an intention behind it, much more than a name change. And I think that everything that you shared is just food for thought for likely a lot of us.
Hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah.
asking that.
Of
And
course.
I feel comfortable. In many ways, it is serendipitous that you are asking me this here. And I would love for this to be shared as, in a collaborative way somewhere, because this is the way I can
Yep.
share it to the world without taking up more space about this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. But Anjali, again, I am so just happy for you, and seeing you just really continue to step into your own. And again, as we started the conversation, our first conversation was 6 years ago, and it's like you're all of that and so much more. And it's not about quantity. I think what I really love about being in the cheering section of your life is just really watching and taking in how you are responding to the world around you, not in a fleeting moment kind of way ever, in a way that is responsiveness rooted in your own experience and the compassion you have for others. I just, and yet everything feels like this very natural building block as it evolves. And so I am so, I'm just really inspired by all of that. And again, just can't wait to keep cheering you on.
Thank you. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for you for seeing me because, that itself is such a gift that you have, Farah. And our friendship and our trust, I know we go back so, I don't know how many ever years right now.
I think it was, I was thinking about this. I think the first time we first connected was right after I premiered The 20th Wife in
That's right.
2015.
That's
Um,
right. That was
yeah.
all.
And then Ayana started coming to the
That's right.
classes and you would come. And then we, little by little, just, hey,
Yeah.
we have something special here.
That's right. That's right. We are so grateful for you in our lives, both
Vice
me and
versa.
Ayana and
Uh,
our family.
yes, yes. And we could say the same. Yeah, no, I love you all so deeply for your individual and collective strengths. And thank you for what you're doing for us, for me, for our Nurani dance community, for the world, all of it.
Thank you so much, Farah, for this absolutely wonderful conversation.
And we clearly have to keep them going because, there's never any shortage of things to talk about.
Never.
But much love for you and gratitude to you and for your time today on Hardesty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.